We have a lot to cover in today's video, including a lot of rumors concerning the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens. Will the Leafs go goalie shopping as well as potentially looking for a D and a forward ahead of the deadline? Plus, could the Montreal Canadiens pull off a significant trade with the Philadelphia Flyers? Will there be big-time players in the UFA market in the offseason? We're going to discuss that. Plus, we have several injury updates, news from the waiver wire, and several updates on the Habs when it comes to all their injured players. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here in today's video, a lot of news and rumors to discuss. Let's kick things off with a quick update here from the NHL waiver wire. We saw the Dallas Stars make a waiver claim yesterday and then turn around and place Tanner Kero on waivers. He cleared here today, so he can be reassigned, and nobody new is on waivers here today, so not a whole lot of waiver wire activity to discuss. The Nashville Predators, of course, had a retirement for Pekka Rinne, so his jersey's sent to the rafters. A lot of his current and former teammates were in attendance, obviously, for that, including former Habs captain Shea, I guess technically still the captain on LTIR. And they did make mention as well that there are plans to build a statue outside of their arena, which should be in place before the start of next season. So quite the tribute for certainly their greatest goalie of all time in their franchise. The franchise isn't overly old, but still Rinne was, somebody who I guess you could say was a bit of a late pick, a late bloomer, and had one heck of a career and had a major impact on the franchise. So nice to see them honor him in such a strong way between the retirement and a statue, which will go outside of the arena here in the fall. Now, as we talked about the other day, Sean Avery, former NHL player and former NHL pest, somebody who's not overly well liked, was making a comeback attempt signing with the Orlando Solar Bears of the East Coast Hockey League. Well, he barely lasted 48 hours. They announced here today that he's been released from that contract, so I really don't know what was up with that. As I mentioned in a video a couple days ago, it just seemed really weird at his age why he was attempting a comeback and why at that level. It just seemed confusing. I've seen former NHL tough guy Matthew Barnaby saying he wouldn't mind getting signed and go back to be able to fight Avery. I don't know. I thought maybe it was just a big publicity stunt, but it didn't last long, so I really don't know why it was ever a thing in the first place, but it's all over with here today. Now, unfortunately, I know, because I mentioned before, we don't really want to be political or anything in this channel, but unfortunately, as I'm sure the majority of you all know, there is some unfortunate events taking place over in the Ukraine with an invasion from Russia. I don't want to really get into that situation a whole lot. I just want to know that my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine, and I hope that what's going on there doesn't seem to last very long, but we do have some updates on that situation because it does have an impact on sport and it does have an impact on hockey. First up in the KHL, of course, their playoffs are getting ready to begin here, and the team from Jokerit in Finland is not participating in the KHL playoffs. Of course, they're the only team that's, I guess, in a non-allied country outside of Russia that's part of that league. Of course, any teams in, like Kazakhstan has a team, Belarus has a team, but they are Russian allies, so they don't, at this point, haven't announced anything. And, of course, the Kunlun Red Star in China, they're allies, so there's no other issues amongst other countries that are outside of the Russian border. But obviously, majority owner Jari Kurri of the Finnish team in Jokerit did announce that they're not playing, and it makes sense. I mean, for a variety of reasons. So their season has come to an end. So there's impact there. There have been meetings that are going to be coming up. I believe there's already been some and more to come here regarding the IIHF, regarding some events that are coming up. I know we've seen other sports make announcements around events that are coming up or supposed to be coming up in Russia being pulled. Of course, we have a World Championship coming up in the not too distant future, as well as the next coming of the World Junior Championships at the end of this year. Both of those events supposed to be there, so it only makes sense to move them because of the unstable situation for one, and secondly, obviously there's a lot of sanctions and different things being placed against them, so you don't want to really support that, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. I would imagine that they'll hopefully be able to find another place to have the World Championships. As far as World Juniors go, I mean, could it maybe come back to Canada yet again? It's hard to say. I think there's lots of Canadian opportunities, whether it be back in Alberta or elsewhere, that would probably be able to throw the things together fairly quick. There's still lots of time, so if they get on this quick, shouldn't be too big a deal, but I would suspect because of pressure from around the world that there's a pretty good chance those events are going to get moved. I know there's a lot of talk on social media pressuring, it seemed like, well, for some are pressuring NHL players, like the predominant ones like Ovechkin, for example, to speak and give his thoughts and opinions on what's going on, since he's been well documented, a big supporter of Vladimir Putin, and whether obviously Putin's not a very popular man in a lot of places right now because of this invasion. So I think a lot of reporters are kind of expecting players to speak out, and but they got to be very careful here. And Ovechkin actually did speak. He did. It was asked to talk yesterday, and was denied. But he did speak today on the situation. Chose his words very carefully. He said, he's an athlete, not a politician. But he did say, please, no more war. He said it doesn't matter if it's Ukraine, Russia, or anything. He doesn't really want to see war anywhere. So. And I also saw a post from Nikita Zadorov on Instagram. It was the same kind of words, like no more, please, no more. So obviously, it does impact Russian athletes because they're going to get asked a lot of questions, which I don't really think is entirely fair. Clearly they're kind of in an awkward spot, but just because they've supported a politician in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean they agree with things. And we don't really need to get into things. I don't think. Just let them stick to their profession here, but it's an awkward situation, unfortunately. But Ovechkin, I think, did handle it well, given the circumstances that we're dealing with in that regard. But let's just hope that can end and things can come together peacefully here in the very near future. Now, when it comes to some other NHL news, Leafs forward Michael Bunting's been fined for diving. It's only a $2,000 fine, but based on the CBA, that's all they get for that. This is the second time this year that he's received warnings and fines for this type of situation. So that's certainly going to impact his reputation probably a little bit with the referees, not kind of thing you want to be known for. So obviously, that's not a big slap to his pocketbook, but we'll see how that impacts things moving forward here. The Pittsburgh Penguins are going to be without defenseman Mike Matheson for probably a couple of weeks. He's listed week to week here with an upper body injury. And as I mentioned in the opener, we do have a lot of updates in regards to the Montreal Canadiens and their long list of injury situations. I know I had mentioned a few days ago we were supposed to get a Carey Price update today. I thought maybe there might be a little bit of something more formal in the form of a press conference or media availability of some sort, but the Habs just listed a series of statements on their social media accounts updating the health and well-being of a variety of players, including Price, and it was pretty brief. It just said for Carey Price that his off-ice recovery and rehab is progressing, but not to the point that he's able to return to the ice next week. So as we mentioned, and he said himself a couple of weeks back, was that the next few weeks are going to be critical for him to be able to make a return this year, and they really didn't see much progress. He hasn't really been on the ice, so you have to think, as I mentioned, I think that his season is probably over. Like at this point, I'm not even sure it's really worth him pushing things to try to get back in play. But time will tell, I guess, where things are at. If he intends to want to try to continue his career, it's probably going to be good for him, at least from a mental standpoint, to be able to get back and play a few games to see how he feels, and just to going into the offseason to give himself a little bit of positive reinforcement that things are good, right? A lot of athletes like to do that if they can, just to kind of, ease their mind a little bit that everything's healed good and he can still play at a high level. But we'll see on that. But all we know right now is that he's not ready to take to the ice. So when that'll happen, we don't know. His goalie partner, Jake Allen, who's been out for an extended time as well, has been able to resume practicing. He's practiced and skated for the past 2 days, so that's a good positive sign. No real definite timetable on his return. You have to think with Andrew Hammond and Sam Montembeault playing relatively well now, that there's really no big rush for either goalie to make a big return, but when the time comes, be interesting to see how they handle that situation. I would assume Hammond probably would have to go on waivers, would be my guess. But at the end of the day, Jake is going to probably be a little bit longer getting back, but certainly will be ahead of Carey Price. Yoel Armia still considered day-to-day. Paul Byron's out again with an upper body injury. Of course, he missed a big stretch to start the season. And both those guys, they shouldn't be out too long, but they are going to continue to be out for a little while. And they are getting back Matthew Perreault and Josh Anderson, who had left the game the other night after getting I believe it was a puck to the face after trying to block a shot. They'll both be good to go and able to play on Saturday when they take on the Ottawa Senators. Now, quick update as well on the general manager search in Chicago, as we talked about that yesterday, I believe it was, that the Hawks were completing their search. Like, they're done with their interviews. Everything's all completed. They're just kind of going through with their committee and the management, I guess, or their ownership, I should say, that'll be making the decisions here, are kind of narrowing down the process and determining who's going to get the job. So Elliotte Friedman was able to do some digging and get some inside scoops here today, indicating that the finalists, the three finalists in that role that are being considered are, of course, the interim incumbent, Kyle Davidson. No big surprise there, as well as Matthew Darche of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And of course, the third candidate is like the outside-of-the-box candidate, which is an assistant GM in Chicago with the Cubs, that is, Jay Greenberg. So one of those three will be your next general manager. There is some speculation that probably not in the way of Darche, but you'd have to think that if they do want to give the job to a guy like Greenberg, that they very well might consider Davidson still obviously being, with the organization in different capacity, maybe being an assistant general manager or something else. I'm not really sure, but hard to say how everything's going to go. There's even potential that they could reach out to other candidates that were interviewed but not necessarily finalists, who could be part of their front office in different capacities here, as well as they can try to continue shaking things up and reshaping this franchise to move forward from all the controversy that they've dealt with here over the past several months. Now, on to the trade and rumor section of today's video. As I mentioned, it's kind of all it stems around the Leafs and the Habs today. For example, with the Maple Leafs, there was a lot of talk today between Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick about the plans that we might see from the Leafs. The fact that Jake Muzzin's now injured on long-term injury reserve. We don't know how long he's going to be on LTIR, of course, but considering this is his second concussion in a short period of time, last time he was out a month, you have to think that there's a pretty good chance that his regular season at least is over, which would certainly give the Leafs a lot of extra flexibility to be able to add ahead of the deadline. When you factor in his contract going to LTIR and the deadline cap space, they could take on contracts that are valued at approximately $7 million. And of course, that's assuming, that there could be additional contracts shipped out as part of any trades, right? So it could actually be a bit more. I don't think they'd want to do anything too significant off the roster, but there could be a player or two, whether it be Justin Hall, Travis Dermott, Alex Kerfooters, not a prominent player, obviously, but a smaller salary that might facilitate a trade. I'm not even sure Kerfoot's really somebody they really prefer to trade at this point. More likely, if they do move a roster player, Dermott or Hall would more likely be that guy. Now, when it comes to the Leafs, as I mentioned, Friedman and Merrick talked a lot about what they might be doing here, and they talked about the fact that they likely would like to add a top 4D, somebody who can kind of take on the minutes and play a role similar to what Muzzin does, considering they don't know how long he's going to be out. It also takes the pressure off of guys like Sandin and Liljegren in the playoffs. And of course, they can also, if they can move either Dermott or Hall or demote them, you can kind of go with your top three, get your Riley, Brody, whoever they acquire. And if Muzzin can come back for the playoffs, that could be your top four for that stretch. And of course, you get guys like Rasmus Sandin, Liljegren, who can be more of your third pair and shelter them a little bit better so they don't have to play too big of a role, which is probably best given the lack and limited amount of experience they have. So there's that. They would obviously like to add, if possible, a second line forward who can fit on John Tavares' line. I know Tavares has been in an awful slump, and certainly something that they need to do here in the short term. And of course, there's also talk, according to Friedman and Merrick, they really wondered if a goalie trade might be in order to strengthen that position as well. Mrazek has not played well as of late, and really in the last probably, 4, 5, 6 weeks, Jack Campbell really hasn't been great either. He had a really hot start to the season. The first couple of months, it was, he was in the Vezina Trophy conversations. But now if you look at his stats for the last really good stretch of time here, really he's had the odd game that's been good, but for the most part, it's not overly great, and you factor in the fact that Mrazek hasn't exactly been lighting it up, then obviously you have yourself a predicament there going into the playoffs. You might want to maybe have a better backup if you could. So I kind of half wonder if they might want to move Mrazek if they could. Now, of course, it's going to have to depend on who they can find and if they really feel it's an upgrade. Clearly, Peter Mrazek was signed to a 3-year deal, so I don't think they had intentions of moving him anytime soon. But if you look at the roster, the cap situation, everything how it's played out, if they don't do it now, there's a pretty good chance Mrazek will be traded in the offseason to be able to afford the increase to Jack Campbell. But I really think the thing that they need most when it comes to Campbell is they need a goalie who can play a decent amount of games, almost like a 1A, 1B with him, so that he doesn't have to take on such a big workload. It seems like when he has to play too much or play a lot of consecutive games, over time he tends to have these streaks where he's just not quite as strong. So, he's a good goalie. He's played well, but, most teams, you need that tandem. And when you're not getting it from your other goalie, it makes it difficult. You rely too much on one goalie, you kind of wear him out. It's a common issue. So hard to say exactly what the Maple Leafs are going to do here. They didn't really specify any specific goalies that they look to, but, I guess it wouldn't be shocking to see them do that. Now, they've been linked to a variety of different defensemen. Mark Giordano's a name that keeps coming up. We've heard of Hampus Lindholm, John Klingberg. They've been linked to a lot of different guys. Now, apparently there was talks as well that they had trade conversations with the Stars around Klingberg, but that the asking price from Dallas was way more than the Leafs wanted to pay, and they politely rejected those deals and moved along. So unless something changes, I don't see Klingberg being a fit there. We've talked a bit about a variety of defensemen who could possibly be Toronto's target. We talked about Ben Chiarot in Montreal, for example, as well. So it's really hard to say as far as who that forward could be as well. There has been talk recently about Miller, but even as Friedman mentioned, he's like, that was just his opinion, which we've talked about here on the channel. Miller to Toronto, I don't really think had much in the way of legs. He said that there was some talk and conversations around Canucks and the Leafs, but it could have been more centered around a guy like Luke Shen. He doesn't really think that Miller to Toronto is very likely going to happen. Hard to say that Miller even gets moved at all. That's a tough thing that the Canucks have to figure out and how to get some cap flexibility. But at the end of the day, the Leafs might be really busy given this newfound LTIR money that they had to work with as it comes to the roster and with the inconsistent goaltending they have. It'd be very interesting to watch them here down the stretch. Now, as I mentioned, could we see a significant trade between the Habs and the Flyers? There's been a number of NHL reporters and insiders linking Jeff Petrie to the Philadelphia Flyers, and there are many that think it does make a lot of sense. Based on how things are sounding, reports indicate that Rasmus Ristolainen is pretty unlikely to re-sign in Philly. Pretty good chance he explores free agency, wants to go to the playoffs, and obviously, after a disappointing year in the Flyers and after all those years in Buffalo, you have to think he wants to test the open market and see what other options he's going to have before he commits to his next contract. So, if they don't keep Ristolainen, they could certainly have a big hole there on the back end, but you would think that for Philly to take on Jeff Petrie, who's got a couple of years left on his contract, that they're probably going to want Montreal to take a contract. So if you look through their roster, who could that possibly be? Well, they're not going to want to move Ryan Ellis. He's been injured a lot this year and certainly would still arguably be their top defenseman. And, Ivan Provorov's not probably going to be going anywhere. It's not in a Petrie trade, at least. When it comes to the forward group, would they want maybe Montreal to take James Van Riemsdyk? He's got this year and next year at $7 million. That's a significant salary, not a long term for Montreal. They're rumored to want to bring in some veterans. Hard to say exactly if that would work, but I'm not sure what the return would be. But I think for Philadelphia to make it work, they're going to want Montreal to take some money, and that very well could be a player that they look to. I mean, Montreal might be looking more like a Travis Konechny, but I'm not sure how that's going to work. At the end of the day, Konechny is younger, has a lot more potential future, I think, ahead of him, but at the same time, hasn't really had a good year. Wasn't really overly great last year either, so his value was down. I don't know what Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers would do in that regard. Maybe this trade could end up being, if it goes down, is being maybe a little bit larger with more pieces involved. and maybe multiple going each way. It's really hard to say, but obviously Petrie to the Flyers does seem to have some legs, and like I said, I've seen it from enough sources now that it appears to be something that we very well likely could see. And it was also mentioned on TSN Insider Trading by Pierre LeBrun that he suspects that the Montreal Canadiens could be very active in free agency and possibly trying to bring in one or two significant names to kind of accelerate their rebuild here a little bit and kind of shake things up. And obviously, they're going to, like he said, they're going to probably try to sell off some of their veteran players between the trade deadline and the draft. And then from there, they can hopefully gain some good cap flexibility and then go shopping in free agency. Now, keep in mind, Jeff Gorton did the same sort of thing with the Rangers when he was leading that rebuild and signed Artemi Panarin. So obviously, Panarin's been a huge help to accelerating things in New York. You take him out of the question, and that just changed things with that Rangers rebuild for sure, and definitely slows things down. So it wouldn't be shocking to see, and there is going to be a lot of fairly significant names be UFAs this offseason if they don't sign with their team is before they cut off here. And it could be very interesting. Some of these guys have a lot of ties and links to general manager Kent Hughes as well, including former clients of his like Patrice Bergeron in Boston. You got Chris Letang in Pittsburgh. Now, I still think there's a pretty good chance both those players stay put or maybe even retire. I mean, especially in Bergeron's case, it's not quite clear what the future holds there. You have to think maybe you got Marc-Andre Fleury between the pipes. You've got Max Domi, a former Montreal Canadian himself. PK Subban, who had a lot of love for the city of Montreal, has a huge financial commitment to the Montreal Kids Hospital. I know he was devastated when he was traded from there. So, you have to wonder what the future holds. And then you look to a guy who's very much in the conversation for, the Hart Trophy, I think, as well as really outperforming his contract. It's going to be tough to re-sign. And that's Nazem Kadri. Kadri's having a monster year with the Avalanche. Pretty good chance that they can't keep him because of the contract he can demand. Would he want to go to Montreal? He's used to playing in Canada, but after playing for the Leafs for a long time. You have to think there's lots of options there, and it's very curious and interesting to think what they might do. Like I said, they could bring in a couple of big-name veterans that are willing to play either in a lot of these cases in their home province or home city, and at the same time, help the rebuild along and work with a lot of Montreal's prospects. I mean, Marty St. Louis done a fantastic job as of late. He's got Suzuki and Caulfield going strong again, which is great because they're a big part of that team's future. If they can, mix in a couple of other, between UFAs and trades, like they might be able to turn things around a little bit quicker than a lot of people thought. So it's going to be some interesting times in Montreal, and it'd be interesting to see what kind of big name free agents they might be able to lure to their organization this offseason, given a new situation with Gorton and Hughes in St. Louis. And LeBrun also mentioned that the allure of playing for a guy like Marty St. Louis, after seeing what he's been able to do so far, by the time we get to the end of the season, and assuming he can keep things up here, and a lot of these players, especially the ones that are from the province of Quebec and might not have really considered it before, they might really love for an opportunity to go be a part of this, to turn things around and play for this guy. There's a lot of energy there. They're having fun again. Hard to say what happens, but it's certainly going to be very curious to watch this situation evolve. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.